Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only
Hello everyone,
mode.
welcome to our onboarding webinar. We're going to get started here in just about a minute. Hello everyone and welcome to our fourth webinar in the Accessing Student Talent webinar series. This series is designed for small businesses interested in learning more about working with a college or university student. My name is Mark Griffin and I am a co-op student working with the marketing assistant role on the Access Student Talent initiative at the Chamber. Our presenter for today's webinar is Allison Mitchell, who is the Experiential Learning Outreach Coordinator for the Access Student Talent Initiative. Allison will be talking with us today about how to effectively onboard students into your workplace. Before we start the webinar, I've just got a couple of housekeeping items. So all attendees will be in listen-only mode. We do have several resources available for you in the control panel, which include the slides from today's presentation, an onboarding checklist, and a copy of the Access Student Talent one-pager. Please ask questions throughout the webinar in the question box in the control panel. All of your questions will be answered at the end of the webinar, and all webinar registrants will be sent a recording of this webinar after the event. The agenda for today's webinar is as follows: an introduction and housekeeping followed by Allison's presentation, and ending off the webinar with a question and answer session. Please note that a feedback survey will launch after the end of the webinar. Please fill that out as we'd love to hear from you and hear what you think of this series so far. I would now like to invite Allison Mitchell to begin the presentation.
Thanks so much, Mark. I'm happy to be here today to talk about how to effectively onboard students. First, I'm going to give a brief overview of the Access Student Talent initiative that the Chamber is piloting. We are working in partnership with the University of Waterloo, Wilfrid Laurier University, and Conestoga College, and this project is being funded by the Government of Ontario's Career Ready Fund. The goal of the Access Student Talent project is to help small businesses more easily connect with post-secondary students for co-op and non-co-op experiential learning opportunities. Through this project, we are working with small businesses and our school partners to determine how students can best work with businesses. So in terms of our process, we will connect with a small business. We'll talk about what that business's interest is in working with students and what their business needs are. During that discussion, we'll talk about what the business is looking for in a student. If the business has an idea that in terms of the type of work that they would like a student to do, then we'll talk about that work and the timing and the duration. If a business is interested in working with a student, but they don't know what type of work to give a student, then we'll talk about the projects that have been on the back burner or extra help that you could need coming up to a deadline, or just general assistance that you might need in order to achieve your goals for your business. Once we have had a conversation with the small business and we gather all of that information, then we take that to the 3 post-secondary schools that we're working with, and we gather the information of how that employer might work with a student in a variety of ways. We summarize those options, and then we provide that information back to the business. Once the business has a chance to review that information and we can answer any questions, if they decide that they would like to proceed, then we will connect them directly with a representative at the school that they would like to work with, and then they can continue the relationship from there. And then we're always here to help for additional support. In terms of who we are helping, for the purposes of this project, we are working with businesses that are up to 50 employees. We're not targeting tech startups at this point. We are not targeting businesses that are already engaged with one of our post-secondary school partners, so businesses that are not engaged with the University of Waterloo, Wilfrid Laurier University, or Conestoga College. And we're helping both chamber and non-chamber members. So previously I mentioned the term experiential learning, and it can be a little bit of a confusing term. When I refer to that term, what I mean is hands-on learning that helps a student transition to employment. The ministry has a definition that they use in terms of experiential learning. And according to them, experiential learning is an educational activity that is facilitated and supported through a college or university. Students participate in workplaces or simulated workplaces where they are exposed to authentic demands and expectations. Students apply and expand on the program knowledge and skills that they have developed in their studies. And the goal is to improve their employability and interpersonal skills, which will support the students' transition to the workforce. So now we are going to talk about onboarding, and we're going to talk about it in terms of the importance of onboarding as well as how to do it. I've spent several years in human resources and recruitment, and in my time in those roles, I've onboarded many employees into organizations. In my current role with the Chamber, I have had 6 co-op students working with me on the Access Student Talent Initiative. I'm the only staff person at the Chamber that is dedicated to this initiative, so I've had to onboard the co-op students in a way that they are able to get up to speed quickly in order to provide me assistance with the initiative. Today I'm going to be drawing from my own experiences with onboarding students, as well as sharing information that we have gathered from our contacts at the University of Waterloo, Wilfrid Laurier University, and Conestoga College in terms of best practices that they have heard of for effectively onboarding students into organizations. There's going to be a few points during this presentation that I'm going to invite Mark to share his experience with onboarding from a student's perspective. This is a reminder that for the purposes of this webinar, we're focusing on students who will be working with a business on a daily basis for a certain period of time. So that could include students that are working with a business for a co-op work term, or it could be a placement which can last a few weeks. It could be a practicum, which is usually a few weeks long as well. So it's a type of role where the business will be guiding the day-to-day activities of a student, as opposed to an in-class project. We're not focusing on that for this presentation. Small businesses are often competing with larger businesses for student talent, but rest assured that we've learned that students are interested in working with small businesses for a couple of reasons. Through our conversations, we've learned that students like working with small businesses because they believe that they can have a bigger impact than if they work with larger organizations. And students tend to have more of an entrepreneurial mindset and are therefore more attracted to working with small businesses. So being a small business can be helpful in attracting student talent to your organization. If you haven't had a student work with you before, or if you haven't had a process for onboarding students before, then this webinar should provide you with some of the resources to get you started. So we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of onboarding. Once a business has made a decision to work with a student and they have selected a student to work with, small businesses sometimes find it challenging to successfully integrate a student into their organization because of the great demands on their time. While we know that small business owners are very busy, investing time into properly onboarding students, especially the first student that works with your business, will pay off with students who are productive. Students are usually with a business for a short period of time, which can range from a few weeks to a couple of months. So getting them up to speed quickly is really important. According to the feedback that we received from post-secondary schools, the first student that a business works with is really important because it can shape how the business works with students moving forward, and that first student can create materials that will help onboard future students. Students can be champions for your business, both inside and outside the organization. And those who have positive experiences will build your talent pipeline. They will promote your business to other students and job seekers as a great place to work, as well as consider you as an employer of choice when they graduate. I'm going to invite Mark to give his perspective in terms of, we've just talked a little bit about the importance of onboarding. And so Mark's going to talk a little bit about when onboarding isn't done as effectively.
Thank you, Allison. Part of what we did for preparation here was I reached out to my fellow co-op students to ask them how they felt about their onboarding and what their experience was with their new companies. One sort of subpar example I heard came from a friend who said that they had basically zero contact with their employer in between accepting the offer of employment and walking into the building on their first day. As far as I know, this left him feeling unwanted, or at the very least gave him the impression that his new company wasn't ready for him. So what we like to think of is that following all of the items on our checklist is something that you can sort of work with and tailor to your individual needs. But what we have found for sure is that not having any communication before the first day puts a lot of extra pressure on that first day and makes further onboarding and making that student into an effective part of the team more challenging than it has to be.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So moving forward, many businesses believe that onboarding happens on an employee's first day, but in reality, onboarding is more than just one day. In today's webinar, we're going to talk about onboarding practices that can happen before the first day, on the first day, as well as after the first day. We're going to share a lot of information today, and it's going to take a little time for, if you've never onboarded a student before, it may take you some time to set up your own onboarding process. But once you do that, that first student that you onboard can really help you create some material and some processes so that onboarding future students becomes a lot easier. And that is something that I have done in my experience with in particular hiring these 6 co-op students over the last year. And so I'm going to share some of my experiences about that. So if we start with onboarding before the first day, this is a really important part. And to Mark's point earlier about when a student accepts an offer and doesn't hear necessarily from the employer until the first day, there's some kind of doubt or nerves that can run through the student's mind. So once you have selected a student to work with you, it's best to reach out to that student prior to the first day. Students can be nervous leading up to the first day, and when an employer reaches out to them, it can put them at ease. When a person feels more at ease, they're going to learn more easily into their role. And by reaching out to students prior to the first day, I've personally found that it provides the student with an opportunity to ask questions that they might have. So touching base with the student, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to take you a lot of time to do. It can be a simple email, which is how I've reached out to the co-op students who have worked with me in the past. And in that email, I've included some basic information. So we've already established what their start date is going to be, but in that email, I have confirmed what time I would like them to arrive. I've included any parking instructions if that's applicable. I've let them know who they should ask for when they arrive. So it depends on how large your organization is. But when the student arrives, they should have an idea of who they're going to ask for. The dress code, that's a big one. So you want to make sure that they're dressed appropriately when they arrive on their first day. And you want to let them know what they can bring with them. So if you're going to be paying the student, so if it's a paid work term, for example, and you need to set that information up, if it's by direct deposit and they need to bring a void check or they need to bring some banking information, then you'll want to let them know that. If there's some training videos that they're going to have to watch, then maybe you want them to bring some headphones, just all of that basic information that you might want to let them know before they arrive on their first day. So further to that list, it's always a good idea to let the students know what's going to happen for lunch on their first day. Sometimes that is a bit of an unknown for students. So, let them know if they should bring their lunch or if you're going to be taking them out for lunch. It's absolutely not required that you take them out for lunch, but it's nice if you can do it. If not, just let them know that they should bring their lunch. And then for co-op students who have worked with me, I've actually sent them some reading material prior to their start date. And I have found that this helps the student have a basic understanding about the organization and about the concepts they're going to need for their role prior to their start date. I do keep in mind, though, that oftentimes the students leading up to their start date will still be in an academic school term, so they could have assignments and they could have final exams. So I'm mindful of the time and I'm not sending a lot of information, but I did send a few reports and highlighted pages that I wanted them to review, so they had a good understanding of some basic information prior to joining. I'm going to invite Mark back to talk a little bit about his experience about connecting with an employer prior to his start date.
Thanks, Allison. One example that comes to mind right away was about a week before the start date that I had here at the chamber. A friend of mine asked me what I was going to be wearing on my first day of work. It wasn't really until then that I realized that I hadn't really established what the dress code would be. The good news of this whole situation was that since Allison had already been communicating with me in the time between my acceptance of the job offer and my first day, I felt totally comfortable asking her about the dress code. She had ended every email that we had in that intermittent period with, please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. So that sort of let me know that it was an okay thing for me to do, to ask questions. I can also speak a little bit to the information about the reading material. Having access to the reading material that was giving me information about the concepts that would influence much of what we did allowed me to start my position with a basic level of understanding for the work that we were doing, which meant that I was turning from sort of someone who was brand new in the environment into someone who was a better and more integrated employee, and that policy was happening faster so that I was able to effect change in the organization more quickly.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So we're going to move to the first day. We've talked a little bit about some of the information that you can send out to the new hire prior to their start date. Now we're going to move to the first day. It's important that when the student arrives on their first day, there's somebody available to meet them. And I know that seems perhaps small detail, but it's a really important detail because the student that will be arriving, perhaps they don't have any prior work experience or little work experience, and they're probably going to be nervous. So making sure that somebody is available to greet them on that first day is important. Ensuring that the equipment that they need for their role is also a good idea to have that ready to go. So equipment, it could be a computer, it could be a desk phone, it could be the email, whatever tools or equipment they need to work on their first day is important to have ready, because it's hard for them to learn their role and become productive if those tools aren't ready. And that would then, greatly impact their ability to be a valuable addition to your organization if they have to wait for those tools. When it comes time to start sharing the information with the student, there's really two types of information that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about organizational information, and we're going to talk about job-related information. So what I mean by organizational information is the information that really all employees should know about the organization regardless of their role. It's often a great idea to start a first day with a tour of the office, and maybe your office is really small and that tour will only take a couple minutes. That's totally okay. Or if it's larger, then it might take a little bit more time. But as you're providing the tour, keeping the following questions in mind is important, so that you're pointing things out to the student that will be helpful to them. So for example, showing them where they're going to be working, if they have a certain desk or if they're going to be working in a certain area, making sure you're pointing that out, pointing out where the washroom is, pointing out where they can get water, coffee, or tea. Is there a fridge to put their lunch in? As you're passing meeting rooms, if you have meeting rooms, then pointing those out. Introducing the student to other staff, especially if the student will be working closely with those staff, is important. Pointing out where the student can eat their lunch, letting them know whether or not there's a certain lunch time. That's also an important tool. And providing this information is a great way to start integrating the student into the work environment. Some other organizational information comes to accessing the office. So letting the student know what are the hours of operation for that office. What will their hours be? Is there anything in particular that they need to know about accessing the office? Can they access the office outside of the standard hours of operation? If so, do they need a key? Do they need an access code? All of that information, again, you might not think about that right away, but it's information that they'll need to know so that they can get their job done. If the student who's working with you is going to be paid, so if it's a paid co-op work term, then letting the students know how they're going to be paid. Is it direct deposit? Is it by check? And when they're going to be paid, and do they have to fill out a timesheet? And also going over any other paperwork that you need them to fill out that first day. Other organizational information, health and safety. So if there are appropriate health and safety policies and procedures, if there's certain health and safety training that's required for the role, then making sure that that's clearly identified to the student is important. And then some of the, what I'll call miscellaneous or other things, if you haven't already gone over the dress code with the student, then make sure you do that. Letting the student know where to park if they don't already know that. Letting the student know who they should be checking in with if they're sick. So sometimes that happens, and you want them to know who they can contact. Recently in our region, we've had several days of bad weather recently. So, if that's the case, then who should the student contact if they're having trouble getting into work, or if they're going to be late for work? That's important information as well. And then just in general, if you have any other policies or procedures in your organization that the students need to know about, that's going to apply to them, then let them know what they are. You can give them a copy of them or point them to where they might be online for them to review. You might be an organization that's so small that you don't have a lot of policies and procedures, and that's okay too, but you just want to make sure that the student has all of the information that they need. So if we move over to job-related information, in addition to the organizational information that you share with the student, you're also going to need to provide the student with information that they need to do their job. And their job might be a role for 4 months or 8 months if it's a co-op, or their job might be to complete a certain task or project while they're with your organization for a couple weeks for a placement or a practicum. It's important that the students have an understanding of what the organization does, as well as what the mission and vision are, so that they can speak about your organization effectively. Once you've shared the organizational information with the student, it's time to train them for their role. So each organization is going to train a new hire in the best way that they see fit. There's lots of different roles that are out there, and each organization will have their own way of training them in terms of how to do the role itself. In addition to showing the students how to do the role, you also want to let them know about what are the goals for the role or the project, so that they're clear about what needs to be completed by the time that they're done working with you. So if there's a certain project that they're doing, you want them to know that that needs to be done by the time their time with you is done. If there's a certain task that needs to be done, you just want the goals to be very clear. Asking the student what their goals are for the term or the placement is also a good idea, because often the student will need to set goals and reflect on those goals as part of their academic requirement. So that is something that they may discuss with you on their own, or it's something that you could ask as well. Let the students know who they should go to if they have a question or if they need some guidance. We always want to encourage the students to try and find as much information as they can, but there's always going to be questions. And so we want the student to know who they can go to for those questions, and the best way for the student to communicate with that person. So is it best that the student gives that person a call, or goes to see them in person, or sends them an email? What's the best way of communication? Small business owners are often strapped for time, and they may not be available if a student has a question. If there's any other employees at the organization, then it might be a good idea to consider having one of those other employees supervise the student. This can provide a really great professional development opportunity for the employee to develop leadership skills, and it can be a great way to retain your current employees. It's sometimes difficult for small businesses to be able to provide professional development opportunities for their employees, so having an employee mentor a student can be a great opportunity to develop those important skills. Whoever that person is that's going to be supervising or mentoring the student should try and meet with that person on their first day, if at all possible. So in terms of other job-related information that's good for the student to know, you want to let them know whether there are any team meetings or staff meetings that they'll need to attend, and if so, what would they need to prepare for those meetings? Do they need to provide an update or a summary? Do they have to introduce themselves? Any information that they need to prepare ahead of time is important for them to know. Another key part is, will the student be required to answer some kind of line or phone for the business? So if a customer calls into the business, will the student be answering that call? And if so, what should the student be saying, and how should they be directing their calls? If the student's going to have contact with clients or customers, they're going to be representing your business, and it's important that the student knows what they should be saying and how they should be directing the calls. So so far we've talked about onboarding from the standpoint of before the first day and the first day itself. We're going to talk a little bit about after the first day. A lot of people often think that once the first day is done, onboarding then is done. But there are a few things that you can do after the first day that kind of continues the onboarding process. After the first day, the student will continue to familiarize themselves with the role. It's always a great idea to have the student set up meetings with other staff, especially employees that they're going to be working closely with. As the person that's going to be supervising or mentoring the student, it's good to set aside a few minutes to meet with that student at the end of their first week, just a check-in. It doesn't have to be long, but it provides them with an opportunity to ask questions, get clarification. It also provides an opportunity to ensure that everybody's on the same page. I've personally found it helpful to, I did schedule a check-in meeting at the end of the first week, and then I also scheduled regular bi-weekly meetings with each of the co-op students. And it's a one-on-one meeting, and we don't meet for very long. It's a check-in to see how things are going, check the progress on the work that's being done, answer any questions. I find it helpful as a way to touch base, and it also allows me to keep tabs on the progress, because at the end of the co-op terms, I'm going to have to fill out evaluations for the co-op students, so having these regular meetings is really helpful. In addition to the one-on-one meetings I have, because I am working with more than one co-op student, and in the fall semester I worked with 3 co-op students, if you have more than one co-op student or more than one student working with you, it might also be a good idea to set up a team meeting. So it's a meeting that we have bi-weekly as well, and it's time for the 3 of us just to get together, again, check the progress on the project, make sure everybody's on the same page, make plans for the next couple of weeks in terms of what has to be done, and it's a way, again, just to make sure we're answering questions and everybody's clear on what has to be done. So some additional tips. At the beginning of the webinar, I mentioned that I have co-op students, that I have co-op students help prepare for future co-op students. So in my particular case, I had one co-op student start last summer, and that was the first co-op student that I had working on this initiative, and the initiative was brand new, so there really wasn't any onboarding material at all. Once I had that student start with me, I had her start creating what I call a co-op guide. So I had her create this guide that can be used for future co-op students that can help train them a little bit quicker. So I had her include some organizational information, so organizational information about the chamber in general, and I had her include some job-related information, so specifics on the job that she was doing herself. And when the students that I had in the fall came, they used that guide as part of their onboarding to learn their role. But then throughout the semester, they also took the time to add more information and make that guide much more robust, so that when I had the 2 co-op students that are working with me this term join, there was a lot more information in there, both organizational information and job-related information. I also had past co-op students come back for a few hours to train the new co-op students. So when I had the co-op student last summer, when she left and went back to school, and I had the new co-op students come in the fall, I had my summer co-op student come back for a few hours to go over the role and provide some training to that student. And then when I had my new co-op student start this semester, I had each of the students from the fall semester come for a couple of hours to spend some time with the students, go over the role, answer any questions that they have, and just provide a little bit more continuity in the role. Because if you are hiring co-op students, there is a period of time where you will onboard a co-op student, they will be self-sufficient in the role, and then they leave, and then you have to onboard a new student. So as much assistance as you can get from previous co-op students really helps with that transition between the co-op students. And another tip that I have found is at the end of the student's work term, have them review the posting that you used to recruit them. And this is especially important if you are hiring a student for the first time, if you haven't posted before, if the role is new. Initially, we post the roles or the type of help that we think we need, and that can change over time. So at the end of a student's co-op term, have them go back and review the job posting or the placement posting that you used to recruit them, and get their feedback on how accurate that posting was. And if they have any suggestions for you on how to revise that posting in terms of accuracy or in terms of being attractive for other students to apply, then that's really valuable input. I'm going to invite Mark to provide us with some of his insights in terms of the co-op guide, using the co-op guide as a reference and having a previous co-op student train him.
Thanks, Allison. When it comes to speaking about meeting with the previous co-op student who was in the role that I'm currently in, I would say that it was one of the most helpful things that happened to me during my first week and sort of early on in the onboarding process. Basically, she took time out of her day to walk me through every aspect of what my day-to-day responsibilities were to be, which allowed me to ask questions and have immediate feedback and learn at my own pace in a way that probably wouldn't have been conducive for having maybe Allison sit with me for 3 or 4 hours and just walk me through everything. So that was very helpful to have a student available who could walk me through basically what she did all day. She also left me with her email address in case any further questions came up, and I did end up having a few more questions that I was able to email her and get an answer to. And basically the whole part of this was it allowed me to be a much more productive employee, and also probably a full and productive employee in a faster sense than if I had sort of been left to my own devices more. Also, the co-op guide that I read as part of my orientation was not only very useful during the beginning of my learning of what my job would be here at the Chamber, but also it became extremely useful, and it's now part of my day-to-day information center for any sorts of procedural questions that I have in the last 7 weeks. Since it was written and updated by the previous students, I'm able to look back at it from a perspective of this is the work that was done before I arrived here, and this is how it was done. So it gives me a real sense of the evolution of the role as well as establishing of policies and procedures. Basically, it's just a free look at the perspective gained by the previous year of work done by the co-op students who were a part of the team, and this has allowed me to sort of piggyback onto their progress and their success to become an active and effective part of the Access Student Talent team.
Thanks, Mark. A couple of other tips that I have as well. I have invited the co-op students who have worked with me to help me with the recruitment and selection of the students for the following term. So for example, the student I had in the summer term, she helped me go through resumes, she helped me interview the co-op students. She had an interest in human resources and recruiting, so that was an area that she wanted to explore further, and it provided a lot of help to me because then I had somebody there to help me kind of through that process, and from a time standpoint, it was really helpful. And then having students sit in on meetings and take minutes. This is something that I use quite regularly. As part of this initiative, we have a steering committee and we meet regularly. And so I have the students sit in on that meeting. They take minutes. It allows me to then focus on the meeting itself and not have to take the minutes. And it also enables the students to develop really important minute-taking skills that will be helpful to them in their careers. And the final one is just having a student shadow an employee to get a better understanding of the business. If it's an employee that they're going to be working closely with, then that's great. But if they can get a better idea of what the different people at the organization do, then they're going to have a better understanding of the organization as a whole, and they're going to be more effective to you. Of course, you have to balance that shadowing because the employee that they're going to shadow also has their own work to do, so you want to be mindful of that. But any shadowing that can happen will be really helpful to the employee, to the student in terms of getting up to speed quickly.
Thank you, Allison. I really do appreciate the information that you've passed on here. To those of you who are on the webinar currently, if you haven't already, please take a few seconds to leave any questions you have in the question box. We will be answering them shortly. And I just wanted to say that if you wanted to learn more, please visit our webpage and follow us on social media listed on the screen to stay up to date with what is happening at the Chamber, and use hashtag #AccessStudentTalent when posting about the initiative. And I did want to give a reminder before we did questions that there will be a feedback survey launching after this webinar. We'd love to hear back from you, so please do fill it out and let us know how you like this series so far. It looks like we've got one question here. Allison, would you do all of this onboarding for a student who was with you only for a short period of time?
So that's a really good question. The time that a student works with an organization can vary from a couple of weeks to several months. It depends on the way in which you're working with the student, whether it's a placement or a co-op term. You'll want to get the students up to speed on the organization and their role really quickly so that they can spend as much time as possible working on the project or the role itself. If a student's going to be working with you for only a couple of weeks, then you'll want to tailor the onboarding to include information that's just necessary for that project and what the student's going to be doing. If the student's going to be with you a little bit longer, then you might want to include most of what we have suggested here today. A lot of what we had suggested is based on when you hire a co-op student that's going to be with you for 4 months or 8 months, so a little bit longer. But when you're in the position that you are guiding the day-to-day work of a student, or you're having a student, you're hosting a student on your site, you will want to do some onboarding. So you can go through the checklist that we've included in the download section, and you can highlight some of the key things that you think would be important for that student to review, maybe their first day, and then you can go from there.
All right, thank you, Allison, for sharing best practices for effectively onboarding students into the workplace. Just want to say that by providing students with the information they need, that they'll be able to get up to speed more quickly. Did we have any other questions at this time? Looks like that's the entire group of questions there. So yeah, as I was saying, by providing students with more information, they're able to get up to speed more quickly, and they add more value to the small business. Engaging with students benefits both the business and the students, and I hope that everyone here will consider working with a student in your business. I'd just like to say thank you, everyone, for attending. If you're interested in talking with us about engaging with students, or you have any questions, comments, or concerns at all, please feel free to contact Allison Mitchell at the Chamber. Her contact information is up on the slide, as well as mine and some of our social media information. I will remind everybody that we do have those 3 handouts available. You can download the slides from today's presentation. You can also take a look at our onboarding checklist that we've created. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.